Okay, it now gives me very great pleasure to introduce one of my dear colleagues, Conjunct Professor Janet Franklin is going to, a senior dietitian at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, and she's going to speak to us about nutrition in adults. Sorry, Janet has 25 years of experience working in research and clinical work in obesity, and her research areas include very low energy diets, nutritional management of weight, eating disorders and PWS. Thank you, Janet.
Okay. Thank you so much to the organisers for inviting me to speak today. It is with great pleasure. Georgie did promote me to a professor. I'm only an associate professor, so thank you, Georgie. I want to also thank Kate. I mean, that was such a great presentation, and many of the same principles go into adolescence and then on to adulthood. So there might be a few slides that I can totally slip over and we can just move on quickly. So I think there are more or less 10 key concepts of nutritional management in people with Prader-Willi syndrome. So quickly, I'm just going to run through these 10 concepts. The first and probably foremost is obviously energy control. But we want to do that in the context of a balanced nutrient intake around structured meals. And we might look at both micronutrients and phytonutrients, which are all those other nutrients that food provide that can't come in a tablet form. We obviously want to think about protein intake. Protein is really important for many of the functions in our body, and particularly maintaining our muscle mass. As we've heard this morning, muscle mass is such an important factor in the whole of the Prader-Willi syndrome. We want to limit fat and sugar control. We want to do it in a setting of behavioural and environmental support. We want to avoid food triggers. We want to think about hydration, which Kate covered very nicely, and we want to regularly monitor what is going on so that we can ensure things are moving in the direction that we want. So we've heard a lot about the hyperphagia that occurs in people with Prader-Willi, and we know that this is coming from the hypothalamus and other parts of the brain. Not only do they feel hungry all the time, but their satiety, which is the point where we start to feel hungry again after eating, so we're satiated for a period of time, this is what typically happens, and then we become hungry. So what we know in people with Prader-Willi is that time when we start to feel hungry again is much sooner than it would be in other people. And they have this increased food preoccupation and increased food foraging behaviour. Now, I want to put this in context. Who has been to the supermarket when they're hungry? Put your hand up if you've been to the supermarket. What happens? Do we buy lettuce? No, we tend to buy high-energy food that we can eat quickly. So that is food foraging behaviour, and we all have the ability to do that when we feel hungry. If you can then think about feeling hungry in a more extreme way all of the time, it makes sense that they go and seek that food, because that is a biological response to hunger, okay? And it's a survival mechanism that helps us to survive in extreme conditions. So then what do we need to do? Oh, this didn't update properly, but anyway, energy requirements. We want to have a bit of an understanding of what are the energy requirements. Did it not work? Right, sorry. Different. Okay. Up on the screen is different here, but that's all good. That one on the screen is correct. So we've already heard from many different people that there is a reduction, somewhere between 60 to 80%, maybe 65%. The 80% is more for the people who are on growth hormone. I want you to note it's not 100% of recommendation, so even on growth hormone, there is still a reduction that is required. Then we could use 7 to 8 calories per centimetre of height. This is a bit more nuanced. That is for a weight loss diet. Or about 9 to 11 calories, or if you think in kilojoules, I apologise that I think in calories, for a weight, gaining a weight maintenance kind of intake. So that really takes into consideration that height. And we know the taller you are, the more energy you're going to need. So this is an example of how that looks like. So anywhere between a weight loss to a weight maintaining diet. For someone who is 1.5 metres tall, that looks like 1,000 to about 1,650 calories. For someone who is 1.7 metres tall, you can see those energy requirements increase. okay? Obviously, the more energy budget we have, the easier it is to manage that diet. So we're always trying to maximise that as possible. So how do we then take these energy recommendations and make it so that they still meet those requirements? Well, we can use prescribed portions. I know Kate was saying that she doesn't particularly like portions, but it's really to give us a guide on how to spread it out throughout the course of the day. We can also use the concepts of energy density, and I'll talk to this point a bit more. And if we're really wanting down to that practical level, as Kate pointed out, we can use what's called that plate model, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So here is just a very general guide of energy requirements, and under the PWS population columns, that is 60% of the recommendation. So I've done it at the lower end just to give a bit of an understanding. So first thing you can see is that there's this boys or men, and this is girls or females. And you can see that naturally boys require more energy than females do, and that's all to do with body composition and height. And then the other thing that you can notice is in the early years, they've still got some extra energy there because of the growth factor. But as soon as they hit adulthood, their growth has normally peaked and our energy requirements actually go down. So this is a real problem because at that time, we're also increasing our independence and we've got more access to food. So we've got less need for food and more access to food. So you can see why, as we transition into adulthood, why weight often becomes harder to control. Okay, so just to give a bit of a visual sort of indication of how we might balance that energy requirements across the day. Now, I've worked this out on about a 1,400 calorie diet, which is about a weight maintenance diet for most people. And you can see this would look like about 5 serves of vegetables, 2 serves of fruit, 4 serves of that breads and cereals, 2 of protein and 2 of low-fat dairy. And Kate made absolutely the point that you can use your hand to give you a guide of what those portions look like. I've just included the protein one here, and it is important to remember to look at the patient's hand or your child's hand or the person's hand that's eating the food, not the person's hand who is serving the food, because that is obviously quite different. Red meat tends to be the palm, chicken tends to be to the first knuckle, and then fish is to the fingers at the top there. Now, if we wanted to make this a low reduced energy diet, like as in a weight loss diet, we would keep the protein and the dairy exactly the same because they are really key nutrients of meeting our micronutrients. What we might do though is we might reduce a serve of the carbohydrates, reduce a serve of the fruit, and reduce a serve of the vegetables just to get it into our energy requirements. So this is just an example of how you might spread it out throughout the day. And you really want to spread it out as evenly as you can. It might be set to different things that are happening in the day, or it might be time-based, if that is often how a lot of places do work around it. It is really important that we maintain predictability around that food because a lot of tantrums and behavioural outbursts occur when the disruption to this structured eating plan is out of whack. But what I want to also show is how just by adding in one extra thing in the day, how that then goes from a weight maintaining diet to a weight gaining diet. Now, obviously, if this only happens once, it's probably not going to have that much of an impact. But if this happens day in and day out, suddenly we're no longer maintaining weight, we're gaining weight. So then how do we know what foods to choose? So one method that we can use is energy density of foods as a concept. So energy density is the amount of energy per gram of food. And energy density is very much based on the fat, sugar, water and fibre content. So obviously the more fat and sugar it is, the more energy dense that food is going to be. The more water and fibre, the less energy dense. And this picture here absolutely highlights that difference between the food. If you look at this high energy density diet, that's across a whole day, that is actually not that much food. And quite frankly, I don't think anyone would eat only half a burger or 3/4 of a scroll, particularly not our individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. So I think you'd be hard pressed to take 1/4 of your scroll away from them. Whereas on that side, this is a low energy density. They've really reduced the sugar and the fat content and boosted up with lots of high fibre and watery foods. And you can see that is a lot more appetising, more satisfying looking diet. This is just to really push down the point of energy density. A lot of people think small in size is low in energy, but in fact small foods can be really high in energy. So if we kind of look at this 3/4 of a muffin down here, okay, it's not even a full small muffin, it's equivalent to 4 pieces of bread or 2.5 apples or this enormous plate of celery. So you'd actually be better off, instead of getting a muffin because you're not feeling that hungry, you might be better off having one egg and maybe some apple instead. And you can see that that's a lot more filling than this 3/4 of a muffin. So Kate has already brought up, where are we up to? The plate model. So I'm not going to go into this, but this is what we can use on a day-to-day basis. If you don't want to count calories and you don't want to think too much about all of that thing, that using the plate model for 2 of your meals is really going to help you. So how does that work? So most people don't include vegetables. Hang on, it's like a logistic nightmare up here. So most people don't include vegetables. They have half their plate as meat and half of their plate as carbohydrate. Now, thankfully, we have just done a study and we know that people with Prader-Willi syndrome actually do much better than the general population in terms of eating vegetables. But this is fairly high in energy. If we then bring it down to be in line with our portion plate, you can see we've already halved the energy content of that meal. However, the plate doesn't look appetising, or it doesn't look like it's enough. And you have to remember that we eat with our eyes as much as anything else. We're already making assumptions about that meal before we even start eating. So then if we actually put the vegetables in, you can see suddenly that plate is full. Yes, it's a slight increase in calories, but not that much. So it would still fit into a menu plan. If we then need to reduce that energy down further, we don't change the portions. We change the size of the plate that we're using. So this is a smaller plate down the bottom here in exactly the same portions, and you can see that we've got that reduction in energy that we're looking for. This is just highlighting this point further, and you can see when we start to eat high energy food how the plate doesn't look as appetising and we don't get as much. So it can be really difficult for all of us, even people serving to somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome, to think that they're having enough food. So using that plate model really helps around that. So is it about never eating some of these foods that other people are eating? No. So this is a burger, 543 calories. What we would recommend is making it at home, so they're still feeling like they're getting some of these special or what they might call normal food that other people are eating, but you can absolutely manipulate it then to be of lower energy. Another trick that is really good is actually cutting the food up into smaller sizes. So you can see here, these 2 plates have exactly the same amount of food on them. One is cut up and one is in a whole food. And I don't know about you, but certainly for me, the one that is cut up looks like more food. Okay? And as I said, we're visual people. We eat as much with our eyes in a way. I mean, obviously we don't eat with our eyes, but we're thinking about it with our eyes. So then the crockery we use is also really important. So making sure that it matches the serving that we want to actually give. So again, these 2 bowls have exactly the same amount of food in them, but one looks okay and the other one looks pitiful. Okay, so making sure that we're getting that right can really help us manage that intake. And the third trick I kind of have for you is cutting up food so they match other parts of the plate. So here we have an example of spaghetti and penne, and we've just used zucchini and cut it in the same way to really bulk it out and look like more food. And the benefit of this is they feel like then they're getting a portion that's similar to perhaps other people at the table or in the home or wherever. Okay, so then I'm coming to the point of making sure that we have about behavioural and environment support in place for our eating routine. And as it's been mentioned many times, it's good to have routine and predictability as long as you can stick to it. Don't start something that you can't actually stick to. It's really good to always have supervision around food, just so that it's monitored. There shouldn't be access to other food, so really packing food away before you sit down to eat can be really helpful to remove that distraction. Having excess food around is a real distraction for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. We then often talk about doing pre-event discussions. So if they've got a party coming up and it might be that they have to serve themselves, discussing, thank you, talking about what is going to happen at those events is a really good idea. For instance, really making sure that, say, somebody else is going to hold the plate, we're going to only have one plate of food, you're going to choose some of the things that you might want, but we're going to try and have some vegetables and protein on there as well. Avoiding or limiting areas where there are lots of food, such as food courts or smorgasbords. And as Kate had really nicely highlighted, making sure there's lots of variety, varying the fruits, varying the vegetables, even the types of protein that you're having, and including high fibre where possible. In terms of hydration, I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to go. If we do include high energy, even coffee can add up over the course of the day. And this is just one sort of throughout our eating episodes. Oops, sorry. Oh, didn't get all those. Anyway, the calories can add up really quickly. But what we should be doing, as Kate said, is making sure that it's all water, because this adds only no calories. People don't compensate for energy got through drinks. Okay, we don't think we've eaten, but the calories can really add up. So really reinforcing. And as I really like Kate's suggestions of the herbal teas and adding lemons and mints and things like that, which is what we would also recommend. Now, when we have reduced energy diets, the micronutrients that are most at risk are calcium and iron. So it is important to include low-fat dairy into the menu plan. It's also important to include red meat, preferably once a day if you can, but at least 3 or 4 times throughout the week if you can't. These nutrients are best got through dietary form, but if they really can't get them in, then you might need a supplementation. Omega-3 is the other thing that you should probably try and include, and you can get that by having fish twice a week. So what I just want to talk about is marrying the limitations with autonomy. So as they go through adolescence and adulthood, we want them to have more autonomy. So what do we do about that? So we've obviously got to limit access to food, and we might have locked cupboards, fridges, kitchen bins. And I heard that there was an excellent talk in favour of restrictive practices by a person with Prader-Willi syndrome yesterday. So it can really reduce anxiety around food by having some of those in place. But how do we give them autonomy around that? We make sure that there is eating all the time so the anxiety is reduced. We might have free access to our water or our low-calorie drinks, and we might get them to have input into their menu planning so they get to decide what happens to a point, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We obviously want to limit access to money, so we might give them exact amounts to go and buy something, or we might use passes for them to be able to go out and about, and we might encourage them to use their money for other things other than food. And then there's been lots of talks about that environment, and always talking about the food environment and access to food in a non-judgmental, non-blaming way, and making sure that we don't use food as a reward. So In terms of menu planning, so I think it was Annika who had the good visual boards. You can still use this in adolescents and adults. What we generally say is that we have names rather than the actual pictures of food, because that can also be less triggering for a lot of people. You get them to decide, they set it up, and then you stick to it fairly rigidly around the day. You want to make sure that all the meals have about the same energy content and all the snacks, so that they can be really interchanged throughout the course of the week or over the weeks. And you want to ensure that that meets those kind of plate requirements. Then we have calorie bargaining. So calorie bargaining, I don't know if many people know about this. So this is something that we use in our clinic, where if there's a special event that they know they're going to eat a little bit more food at, we try and reduce some of that energy for the week before. And it's in negotiation with the client or the person. So what it needs to happen, though, is it needs to be a reduction of something that's adding energy. So it's no point to say, all right, well, we're just going to cut out your diet drinks, because that doesn't actually offer any energy exchange. So you might say, okay, well, you've been buying a cup of coffee as part of your plan. Are you willing to give that up for a week to be able to enjoy the party food with a little bit more freedom? And you're never going to match it exactly. That's not the point. It's about really just getting them understanding that there is an energy budget, and we need to try and fit into that budget. Okay, thank you. This is my last slide. So one way of making sure that we're always meeting these requirements is through monitoring. So monitoring both of the blood tests and of our weight on a regular basis. Now, we generally just say a weekly weight is fine, but you also might do it pre and post big events just to have a look at what kind of gone on. It's most like, if weight's going up, it's most likely they've got access to food somewhere. It's much easier to eat 100 calories than it is to burn off less 100 calories. So it might be physical activity if you really can't find the food, but it's most likely to be food. So look for those extra accesses to food. And that's the end.